And so, impeding your imposter, learning her secrets, uncovering her weaknesses, and taming her power. This is a topic that I came to most recently when I was at a conference of women in professional roles, and heard presenter after presenter stand up and apologize to the audience for daring to speak to them, for daring to assume that she had knowledge that they didn't have. And it really struck me that through my career, I have heard this from women over and over. And it's not necessary. And I think it really starts to uncover for us an issue of women, for women, that really does get in the way of our careers, of our satisfaction, of us putting ourselves up for opportunities. And so I thought it was worth us just digging into this a little bit and trying to understand what's going on with it. And so let's start with the definition. Sorry, that's not what I wanted to do. What I'm going to try and do is just change my view, because I've got you across my screen. There you are. So this is the definition of somebody who has imposter syndrome. It's somebody who has persistent doubt concerning one's abilities or accomplishments, accompanied by the feeling of being exposed as a fraud, despite evidence of her ongoing success. Now, I don't know if that sounds like you or like anybody you know, but in actual fact, it's really common, as I mentioned, amongst women. And there are quite a few famous people that you might think of, or that you might not think of, that share this syndrome with us. Let's just flick through a few of these. No, it's not going to let me do that. Oh, that's because Julie's just popped back in. Sorry, just let me. Hi, Julia, you okay?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what happened there, but it dropped me out.
Oh, okay, no problem. I'm glad to see you back. We've just gone through the definition of imposter syndrome, and I'm about to introduce you to a few famous ones, except it's not going to let me do that. Let me just... There. So Michelle Obama was asked what it was like to be a symbol of hope for women and girls. And she said, "I still have a little imposter syndrome. It never goes away." That you're actually listening to me. And here's Jodie Foster. "When I won the Oscar, I thought it was a fluke. I thought everybody would find out and they'd take it back. They'd come to my house knocking on the door. 'Excuse me, we meant to give that to someone else. That was going to Meryl Streep.'" And guess what? Meryl Streep says, "You think, why would anyone want to see me again in a movie? I don't know how to act anyway, so why am I doing this?" Maya Angelou. "Each time I write a book, every time I face that yellow pad, the challenge is so great. I've written 11 books, but each time I think, uh-oh, they're going to find out now. I've run a game on everybody and they're going to find me out." And then this lady, do you recognize her? This is Sheryl Sandberg, head of Facebook before it became, or chief operating officer of Facebook, and then Meta. "Every time I was called on in class, I was sure that I was about to embarrass myself. Every time I took a test, I was sure that it had gone badly. And every time I didn't embarrass myself, or even excelled, I believed that I had fooled everyone yet again. One day soon, the jig would be up." I wonder if this sounds familiar to any of you, or perhaps if it sounds a little bit like some of the voices, the inner critic that you've heard in your own head, or amongst colleagues, friends that you've spoken with. We're in very great company. These are amazing women. They're all high-achieving women. Why should they doubt that they are as effective as they are, as competent as they are? Why do we share this kind of issue? The term imposter syndrome was first identified in some research that happened in 1978 by a relatively small study, only 100 professional women, and it was done by two professors, Professor Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes. And then Dr. Valerie Young in 1982 did a much bigger study and interviewed thousands and thousands of professional women. And what they found, or what she found, was a whole series of complexities. So that when we talk about imposter syndrome, it sounds sometimes like it's only a single thing that we're talking about. But Dr. Young has identified a whole heap of complexities around this, and that's what I want to take you through tonight. Since then, there's been all sorts of further studies, probably none quite as comprehensive or as deep as Dr. Young's study, but across the world, more studies of men and women, studies of people of different ages in different professions. And all of these studies tend to confirm the original understanding that came from that early research. And around 70% of professional women, 70%, identify with having had or currently suffering with, or having suffered in the past with, imposter syndrome. And these are women in competitive fields from medicine to the arts, science, business, tech, academia. These are all very highly effective, highly competent women saying that they feel like frauds, that they feel like imposters. And so why is this the case with women? Well, you can thank your good girl. I don't know if good girl is a term that you've heard about before. I don't know if it's a term that you talk about in Sweden very much, but good girl tends to be part of, particularly in Australia at least, tends to be part of the way in which girls and women grow up. And so from an early age, your good girl was very often praised for being humble and for being modest. A good girl was encouraged to share with others, from the earliest ages, share her toys, share her food, share her time, share her care with others, including sharing her achievements. Your good girl was valued for her looks and her body, but not necessarily her intelligence and her skills. A good girl learned to not speak up. A good girl learned to be quiet, to not ask questions. A good girl learned that she was quite often ignored and dismissed in mixed groups, mixed gender groups. A good girl was quite often taught that competence was key. It was really important to be very competent in whatever she was doing. And at the same time, quite often discouraged from owning her own successes. So again, that sense of needing to share the achievement, share the success with other people. She quite often grew up being reminded of what she hadn't done rather than what she had. And in a lot of societies, good girls grew up lacking the powerful, successful feminine role models, lacking the Michelle Obamas, lacking the Angela Mayus, the Maya Angelou's, lacking the Sheryl Sandbergs, and governed by societal rules and expectations. Now, boys, of course, also grow up governed by societal rules and expectations, but actually not so much. And this is again what the research confirmed, such that boys or men, when they feel like they have an area of competence or lack, it doesn't stop them. It doesn't stop them so much from trying, from putting their hands forward, putting themselves forward for opportunities. And so again, you might be aware of research over many years that's looked at when girls are given things to play with. They don't get into it in the same way that boys do. boys will get in and be quite rough and pull stuff apart and you know, smash it and break it. Girls, not so much. They're, even from a very early age, much more careful, much more expecting that they need to be respectful. So, you know, this concept of good girl in our society, I'm interested if any of you were prepared to share. You know, oops, sorry, I've gone too far. If any of you were interested to share your experience of good girl. Maybe before we do that, I wonder if you would do something for me, a really quick little exercise. Would you be prepared to just sit back and close your eyes for a minute? Just close your eyes, because I'm going to say 3 words to you. And I want you to be aware of the very first images that come to your mind. Don't edit what you see. Here come the 3 words: lawyer, professor, doctor. Now, could you please open your eyes? And who did you see when I said those words? Linda, if you'd like to pop yours in the chat, feel free. Sarah, Julia, if you felt willing to let me know. Who did you see, or what did you see when I gave you those 3 words?
I mean, I see women now,
Fantastic.
but I wouldn't have. And interestingly, a colleague of mine posted something the other day. So she's a career board director, and she was using an AI tool.
Mm-hmm.
So she put a photo of herself into the AI tool and said, make me look like a board director. And so it put a man's face on her and made her cross her arms.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. And Linda has said, strong, capable women. That's fantastic. I've gone too far again. You guys are quite in the minority, even with the most recent research. That question gets asked quite commonly in presentations like this one. And for so many women, even women who are professors themselves, doctors themselves, lawyers themselves, quite often the image that comes to them first is that of a white, middle-aged man. So it's wonderful that it's changing, and it's so important that it's changing, because if we can't see ourselves in these roles, then it's impossible for us, once we get into them, to accept that we belong there, that we belong in them.
I was just going to say,
please,
Karen,
Sarah.
that the word that pops to mind too, to add to this, is around compliance. Because when I think about as a child, often the terms, there's a good girl then, it was always accompanied with a request, like, you know, run down to the shop and grab me some bread. There's a good girl then.
Yes.
So often, compliance is very much joined to the concept of being a good girl.
Yes, absolutely, Sarah. Thanks so much. Absolutely, that sense of you will serve, you will respond, you will do as you've been asked to do, you will follow directions, and that's what makes you a good girl. Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. One of the things that's really important to consider is this concept of competence and what competence means. Because in terms of imposter syndrome, and particularly for women, our concepts or the expectations that we put on ourselves around the expectation of competence is really important and has a really powerful impact on how we feel in a particular role. And it's at the core of imposter feelings. And boys and men tend to not apply the same standards of competence. Again, I'm not sure whether you've seen the research that talks about women's preparedness to apply for roles for which they have 70, 80, 90% of the skills and qualifications and attributes that a role requires. Men, it's been demonstrated quite typically, if they have 40%, they will apply for that role. women, unless, or a lot of women, unless they can see that they have 100% of what's being asked for, won't even put themselves forward. And again, it comes to this core piece around competence. And so that's part of what we want to look at tonight. So how do you know you have an imposter on board? There are a whole range of ways in which your imposter might show herself. And, you know, one of the first things is that you put down your own achievements. You minimize your beliefs. You say things like, anybody could have done that. It couldn't have been that special if I did it. Anybody could have done that. Minimizing the language. It wasn't that terrific. It wasn't such a big deal. Unable to accept praise, recognition, even thanks. And, you know, it was nothing. Don't mention it. That kind of lack of just taking on board what somebody's praised you for. Attributing your success to other people. This was a big one for me. It took me most of my career to work out that in actual fact, if I've had success, I have had some part to play with it. It wasn't just because I had wonderful teams, or just because I had wonderful mentors, or just because I got lucky. And these are the stories that we tell each other, tell ourselves. Anything or anybody other than your own contribution, your imposter will say was responsible for your excess. And these then build into this anxiety, as Maya Angelou expressed it, and Sheryl Sandberg, this anxiety of being found out. Somebody's going to find out that I just got lucky, or that somebody else helped me, that it wasn't really me, that I'm not really that capable. And so that in itself turns into a fear of being visible. So we don't put ourselves forward for opportunities. A fear of not belonging, you know, that we walk into a meeting in a role and feel like we don't belong there because we don't believe in our own competence. And as I mentioned, just that reluctance to step up and to speak up and to take opportunities. And so even when you have a success and other people are recognizing your success, imposter syndrome makes you worry then. Well, gee, I got lucky this time. What if I don't get lucky next time? What if that same amazing constellation of planets that meant that I had success this time isn't there next time? And that's a really debilitating kind of belief to go through your life with. And so I wanted to pause there and just ask if this is landing. Does this make sense for you? Is this resonating with anything that you've felt or heard from other people around this area?
It certainly does, Karen. And I was just reading Sarah's comment about the big ego, and yep, ticks in those boxes, trying to avoid the big ego. But also when you were talking about the constellation of planets, sometimes I feel like it's more of a feeling of, well, I got through that one by the skin of my teeth. How many times can I, you know, get through something by the skin of my teeth, rather than perhaps reflecting on it and saying, well, we did that well, or, you know, that went okay, or those sorts of things.
Yeah, exactly so, exactly so. And that feeds into, you know, the cost to our mental health, the cost to our professionalism, and so the cost of having an imposter around, this lack of confidence, this lack of willingness to put yourself forward, the reluctance to seek opportunities, can play out if you're a leader, a team leader, in a temptation to micromanage because you're so worried that if you don't, you know, guarantee these amazing outcomes, that you'll be exposed as a fraud, as a bad manager, as a bad leader. It can come around as being really super sensitive, even when people are giving you great feedback. If there's anything that doesn't sound like it's perfect, then that sensitivity to, you know, the negativity bias, the only hearing the negative and the criticism rather than the praise and the recognition. Of course, ultimately, it can certainly play out in terms of inequity in your compensation in your pay. You know, women are known to not seek pay rises in the way that men are prepared to ask for pay rises. Professional women don't tend to negotiate as hard or as closely. And of course, I'm not talking about every single woman, but as a collective of professional women, we tend not to negotiate on our own behalves for better pay and conditions, because we're so worried all the time that in asking, somebody will turn around and say, well, no, I've found you out, you're a fraud, you don't belong here. So we don't take on any opportunity that might have an uncomfortable conversation that confirms that we're not who we're presenting ourselves to be. And so that's kind of all the external stuff. Internally, self-sabotage, again, that setting yourself up to fail because you're so desperately worried that you're going to fail. And then not sleeping because you're worried, that inability to focus, paralysis around what to do next. It can be very isolating. It can cause a lot of stress, anxiety, ultimately a lot of shame, a lot of overwhelm, and burnout. And I guess I have seen in my own network any combination of these costs affecting really very, very intelligent, competent, smart women. Now, I mentioned earlier that there's complexity in this, and more complexity than's necessarily always presented. But at the core, women who are suffering from imposter syndrome are holding themselves to unrealistic and unsustainable standards of competence. And so when they fall short of that standard, they feel shame. They feel shame. And these standards can appear in very different guises. And so which of the following sounds like you? Because there is more than one imposter in imposter syndrome. Which of these is mostly yours? It might be that, that in actual fact, you identify with more than one of them. One of them tends to be the strongest. Let's run through them. The perfectionist. It isn't done yet. It isn't done perfectly. It could be better. So for the perfectionist, the primary focus is on how something is done. This includes how her work is done, how it's conducted, how it turns out, how other people respond to it, and one minor flaw in an otherwise stellar performance will have her thinking that she's failed and taking on the shame of failure and taking on the sense of not being competent. So that's the perfectionist. This is my personal favorite, the expert. I can never know enough. I always have to know it all. I have to know everything before I can feel competent to lead others in it, before I can feel competent to speak about it, before I can feel competent to accept responsibility for something. I have to know everything. And so this is the knowledge version of perfectionist. And the primary concern for the expert is on what and how much you know or you can do. Because you expect to know everything, even a minor lack of knowledge makes you feel failure and shame. Lawyers, academics, doctors, people who others go to for their expertise, this is a particularly strong one for them because they feel like they can't say, I don't know, because the expectation they believe is that they will know everything. Then there is the soloist. I should be able to figure this out on my own. So the soloist cares mostly about who completes the task. To be a real achievement, it has to be you and you alone, because you think you need to do and figure out everything all by yourself. And so if you feel like you need help for something, then again, that feels to you like a failure, sense of weakness, and something that's shameful. And there's the natural genius. If I were actually any good at this, it wouldn't be so hard. The natural genius also cares about how and when accomplishments happen. But for the natural genius, competence is measured in terms of how easy it is. How fast can I learn it? How fast can I get up to speed? And the fact that you have to struggle to master a subject or a skill, or that you're not able to bang out a masterpiece on your very first try, seems to you like a sense of failure. It seems like a lack of competence. It feels like a weakness, and ends up in shame. And then there is Superwoman. Superwoman measures competence based on how many roles she can be wonderful at all at once, how many roles she can juggle and excel in at the same time. And so falling short in any one of those roles, as parent, as daughter, as sister, as friend, as colleague, as leader, as employee, as community assistant, as canteen, tuck shop mum, falling short on any single one of those roles means that she is a failure, because she expects that she should be able to handle it all, and to handle it all perfectly. And so, as I mentioned, you might have more than one. You might have more than one of these. But for most of us, there tends to be one that's stronger than the others. And I mentioned earlier, expert is my personal favorite. That's something that I have grown through and learned about, and that I'm finding it easier now to deal with. And let me just, give me a minute just to jump into the chat and see. So Linda, this is me altogether, terrified to try again because maybe that lucky next time. Safest to not try again. And so many of these, Linda. Perfectionist, be expert, micromanage to guarantee perfect outcome, never enough. Yeah, absolutely. I did think that I didn't have any natural genius in me. I thought that that I had no issues with natural genius until I realised how much I'd been beating myself up about the fact that I had written a fiction book and it was not a bestseller. Oh, so I don't know, Julia. Do you have more than one? What do you think? How's this landing for you?
Definitely have more than one. Probably have the perfectionist. I think the expert now, academia has beat out of me in that sort of sense of, if you're in academia long enough, you know that there is so much more to know, and you start to get comfortable with it. It was probably there up front and centre early on. Not sure that the soloist is there very much, but probably have the natural genius, and maybe gave the Superwoman away a little while ago because I failed at it. I don't know. So they've probably all been there at some point.
Yeah, and thank you. That's such a great point. I think we do take them on and leave them behind at different stages of our careers or of our lives. And so for me, that's why it's so helpful to be able to unpack and work out just which of these is causing a problem at the moment or in time. Sarah, did you have anything that you wanted to share there?
Look, mine is probably a bit around the expert in that. So I have an executive coach, and we've spent a fair bit of time around when I say, oh yes, I'm definitely up for that. I just need to do a bit more work on such and such first, and then I'll be ready to do that. And he's amazing. I'm a lot better at it. It started when he said to me one day, Sarah, what if you're already there? Yeah. And I went, what? What if you're already there? And I went, what if I'm already there? Yeah.
And I think the fact that everyone else sees a highly capable individual, your mentor sees a highly capable individual, when all that we in these moments see are women who are failing, who are incompetent, who are frauds. If you've got other people telling you maybe you are there, then that's a pretty good indicator that imposters may be, showing up, and that your perception in that moment doesn't necessarily bear as close a resemblance to reality as maybe you'd like it to. So she is our tyrant for competence, for rules. Each of your imposters, each of these 5 imposters runs with a different set of rules. And I wonder if you can see which of these might fit to which of the imposters. If you were really intelligent, if you were really capable and competent, you would know everything in your field. Well, that's expert.
Mm.
If you were really competent and capable and intelligent, you would get it right the first time. That's your natural genius.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Genius, yeah.
Genius, yeah. If you were really any good at all, you would excel in everything that you do. There's your Superwoman. You'd always know the answer. There's your expert again. You'd always understand what you're reading. You'd always feel confident. You'd never make a mistake. You'd never be confused. You'd never need help. You know, there's your Soloist. None of these statements are statements that as women you would say to a dear friend who was struggling, because they are not realistic statements. They're not realistic statements, and yet we say them to ourselves over and over, depending on what's going on with us. So you can rewrite your playbook. You can rewrite your rules. If Soloist is the one that plays out most for you, you know, if you were any good, you wouldn't need other people to explain. If you were any good, you wouldn't need anybody to show them. There's a different way, a kinder and much more compassionate way to write a rule for yourself around when I am new to something, I'm going to need help. When I'm new to something, and this new to something is quite important. When I'm new to something, it's okay for me to look for other people that can show me the easiest way or the best way. It's okay for me to ask for help when I need help. If it's the natural genius, it's okay when I've never done this before. It's okay for me to assume that I'm not going to be perfect with it straight away. And so we can, once we've identified the rule that we and our imposter are enforcing upon ourselves, we can change the script. We can change the script. How does that land for you? Make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. What other rules do you set for yourself? Listening into this, are there other things that you tell yourself, other rules that you've created for yourself that drive your imposter?
I can't think of any.
Yeah, that's okay. No, that's okay. That's okay. We've laid out quite a few of them there, and these tend to be the most common ones. Yeah. The thing about imposter syndrome is, if you really want to beat it, if you want to beat imposter syndrome, you've got to change the way that you think. Imposter syndrome comes to you as a feeling of anxiety or as a feeling of shame or of failure, but it comes from your thinking. And so in order to beat imposter syndrome, you can't just find a way to feel better until you think better. So it's really important that we change these scripts. And you know, this redefining the idea of competence for yourself is the fastest way to actually get rid of imposter syndrome. So here's some good news about the imposter syndrome, about the imposter. She is predictable. She turns up whenever you're trying something new. That's when she turns up. And that's why actually you might see different stages of imposter at different life stages. Because if you're a new mum, you might have a sense of you know, that you feel like you've got to do it all yourself. You don't want other people interfering. And yet, you know, that's probably when you most need to reach out. If you're new into a job and you don't want anybody to find out that actually maybe you got promoted into something before you were ready, that's when she shows up. If you're stepping out of your comfort zone, if you're breaking new ground, all of these are examples of times when you are pre-competent. It's before you are fully competent. And so this is when it's most likely that imposter will turn up for you. But she is very compliant. And that's a word that Sarah used earlier, because she is based on good girl. She is very compliant and she follows the competence rules that you have set yourself. And that's why it's so important to change those rules, to catch the statement that you're making for yourself about your own competence and to change that. And she only travels with high achievers. So if you're worried you're inadequate, the presence of your imposter is a really good indication that you're not. And she can inspire you to greatness because she doesn't let you get away with being complacent. She never lets you off the hook around being prepared and striving. So you can work with her, you can use her to actually improve your performance and to improve your comfort with your performance, but you've got to be aware of her showing up and what it is, what rule it is that she's trying to enforce for you. And she can be tamed. And so these are the steps for trying to tame your imposter. And so the first thing is to call her out, to actually, when you're hearing yourself say things to yourself about not being competent, about not feeling confident, about not feeling, you know, that you deserve to be in a room or in a conversation or in an opportunity, identify that that's your imposter. And if you can, give her a name. Give her a name. My imposter is Maeve. She's a nasty piece of work. I can see her, I can hear her, I know what she dresses like, and when she rocks up in my head these days, I can say, thank you so much, Maeve, back in your box. It can be quite a strong, because this is, as I mentioned earlier, this is a mental process. It can be quite a strong practice to call her out. Call her out and actively recognize her. And recognize that she is there to protect you. Your imposter actually comes with a purpose. The fact that she is trying to stop you from making a fool of yourself. She's trying to stop you from showing everybody that you don't belong. So she serves a purpose. And so what she's good for doing, when you hear her, when she turns up, it's good for you to be able to step back and say, okay, so here she is. I'm not comfortable. I'm not feeling as competent as I would like to. Is it realistic for me to expect myself to be that competent? Would I expect any other person in a similar circumstance to be that competent? But to identify you've stepped out of your comfort zone, and to take her warning and to say, okay, so what do I need? What do I need? Where are the risks for me? Where might I trip up? But underlying all of this, challenging the competence assumptions you've made. If you are in a new environment, a new role, a new relationship, a new leadership, to challenge the expectation that you have to be perfect, that you have to be Superwoman, that you have to know everything, that you have to do it all by yourself, that you have to be able to understand it without any help at all, without any, earlier experience. So challenge those assumptions and give her some new rules. When you can work out for yourself, when you can hear in your head what she's telling you, give her a new rule. That might be something like, I'm new in this job and I'm going to seek out other people who can give me some advice. Or I'm new in this role and I'm not going to expect myself to know everything because nobody else expects me to know it all. Or I'm new in this role and I can't give my best to this and also to the 57 other things that I'm juggling at the moment. And so which thing or things am I just going to put to one side for a little bit so that I can focus on this? Okay, so give her some new rules, depending on what you are telling yourself. It's always a good idea to seek objective advice from people that you trust. And Sarah mentioned earlier her mentor. People that you trust are going to have not only your best interests at heart, but the fact that you trust them means that you know that they're going to tell you the truth. And so when they tell you you're doing a rock star job, please just bloody believe them. Trust what they're telling you. There's been lots of advice that I've read around imposter syndrome that says things like, give yourself a, make a little file of your achievements and review that from time to time. The reality is, if you're in imposter, you are unlikely to accept that independent verification unless it's from somebody that you deeply trust. So if you are having some sense of imposter, if you are feeling like you're not doing as well as you expect that you will, you go find somebody that you really trust and you put it to them and you ask them, and then you trust what they tell you, including when they tell you, as they more than likely will, that you're doing a fantastic job for where you are on this particular new journey that you've undertaken. Practice putting your hand up whether you're ready or not, going to that discussion earlier, because the reality is you're probably never perfectly ready. And the other reality is you don't need to be perfectly ready. Put your hand up, put your hand up. And then the other thing, because I guess I come from a philosophy of women helping other women, because frankly, men have had it their own way for far too long. We have got to work together and support each other. And so if you are seeing this, if you're seeing imposter syndrome in a colleague, in one of your staff, in a team member, in a peer, call it out for her. Call it out for her and tell her what you've learned around imposter. Have the conversation with her about what expectation she's holding of herself that might not actually be reasonable and realistic. How does that land for you?
I'm just interested in whether you think, do you think imposter syndrome serves us in some way? That it's more, sometimes I wonder, is it more comfortable to be like that? Is it that you must be getting something out of it to be in that space? What do you think?
Well, I think, again, it takes you back to good girl. It takes you back to that comfortable place where you grew up as a child being expected that you weren't actually that bright. You weren't actually that competent. You weren't actually that intelligent. You weren't somebody that people would look up to. I think it potentially takes you back into a zone in which, as a child, you knew exactly what was expected of you, and all you had to do was follow what people told you to do. Run off and get the bread. There's a good girl. Go and look after your brother. There's a good girl. So certainly, there may well be comfort in it, but I do think the other thing that the other purpose that it serves is essentially to protect you. And this goes outside the scope of what we're talking about tonight, and I'm a little bit conscious that I'm holding you a little bit later than I'd said I would. But there is a whole sphere of knowledge around the parts of ourselves. We are made up of many, many, many parts. And you hear this in our language. We'll say, well, part of me wanted to put my hand up for that promotion, but the other part of me was too frightened that I'd be seen to be arrogant. So we have these parts in ourselves, and one of the parts is this protector part. And sometimes I think imposter can be there as a protective mechanism. She's there to stop you from making a fool of yourself. I mean, one of the deepest emotions that we can feel, and which, women from the earliest ages grow up feeling, is shame. It's shame. And so imposter can serve a purpose in protecting you from shame. And she protects you by stopping you from stepping out of your comfort zone, from putting your hand up, from seeking opportunities, from putting yourself forward. Does that make sense, Sarah? You still there?
Yep.
Yep. Yeah, great.
I was on mute, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah. Alrighty. Okay, we are well over time. I hope that this has been useful and interesting for you. I'm really happy to continue the conversation, you know, offline if you would like to. I'm just going to finish with a little bit of fun. So embrace imposter syndrome, revel in the fact that you have fooled everyone. You are a trickster goddess. You are the imposter child for deception and clever ruses. So if you can't beat her, enjoy her. But of course you can beat her, you can tame her. That's it for the presentation. Thank you very much for joining me. Thank you very much for giving the time. I know you've got many other priorities that you could have been spending your time on tonight. So I enjoyed it and loved the conversation.
Thank you, Karen.
Yeah, my very great pleasure.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, all right.
Okay.
Thank you for allowing me to record it. As I mentioned, I'll probably post it on my website. But predominantly, I think most of that recording will be the slides. So hopefully, not too many privacy issues. All right.
Thank you. Okay.
Thanks. All the best. Take care. Bye-bye.